right, if we would all be making our way to our seats, please. She's making her way. Good morning. Certainly is good to be here this morning. Hope life's been treating you well lately. If not, there's no better place to be than right here, gathering with those with like-minded faith and observing the things of God, observing the truth of God through His Word, and then worshiping Him collectively. A little later on, again, no better place to be. So we weren't in Romans last week, and we're actually going to postpone that perhaps another week or two today and do something different again. Just trying to give you a bit of a break, I guess, after over a year of study and only about 10 chapters to show for it. Now, last Sunday morning, we looked at the resurrection and the evidences for the resurrection, seeing that God, having raised Jesus from the dead, seems to be the most plausible explanation for His empty tomb. And I'll mention it again if you'd like to discuss any of those points in more detail, because there's a lot more detail to each of those. My office door is open anytime. But what we're going to do this morning is different from that. It's a little similar, but only because we're also going to spend this morning to consider why we believe some of the things that we do believe. Where's that clicker? I just noticed. I don't have it. Right there. Thank you. Meant to have a slide there, but I don't. All right. Do I not? Sure don't. Anyway, now there's this. There's a phrase that I want to focus on this morning, and it is progressive Christianity. What does that phrase mean to you? Progressive Christianity. Moving on, progressing. Okay. Liberal. That's a term that we would definitely associate with that. Yep. Anything else? Right. So it could be a positive thing. You could be a forward-thinking Christian, and that certainly sounds like a positive thing. But progressive, of course, has a negative connotation, as you said, and I think for good reason. Changing with the times. Okay. Yeah, going beyond what's written, like what Paul said. Scott?
Well, might be the actuality. But when we look at the term progressive, there is a term that is applied to scholastics, academia. There's a term that's applied to music. There's a term that's applied to a lot of things that has the term progressive in it.
Right.
And what it means is moving from one thing to the next. If we stop and think about that, that's how all of us learn Christianity. We learn it in bits and pieces. The first is the fundamentals, the foundation. But no new young Christian knows anything about Revelations. They don't, because they haven't studied. So it's a progressive thing in our lives. And I think that harkens back more like what Ken was saying. That's how it should be.
Right.
How it's applied today and how it's used today. I don't believe that's how most people.
Right. So we should be progressing individually, moving on to solid food, leaving the milk. But the problem is whenever one progresses from one thing to a whole different thing, so leaving Christianity and doing something else.
Changing with the times. is what I think of.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the idea behind that is where the error comes in. The motivation for moving on with time and all of the philosophy that goes with that. It's a breathing document. We're not the same as we were 2000. I mean, they have a lot of logic to go with that. But that's where we get into trouble with that.
Right.
Is the need to change something that's eternal.
Yeah. Mark.
Well, and so, discussing this and coming up with some thoughts on it, I think that there's things that are, quote, progressive, and again, in a good context that we can even apply it to moving on with the times. For example, we have these screens up here.
Sure.
We use them, and that's progressing with the times of the technology that's available to us. I think we basically see that as a good thing. But when we're talking about the changing with the times in terms of what the world's moral standards are, that's when I think we are starting to, we're going away from what God has taught. It's not based on the world standards. And I think, and I have talked to one person who's a member of the church, in particular, who takes somewhat of a view that that the Bible should be looked at as recognizing that times change. Now, I can understand that to some degree, right? We talk about a lot of things, like how the role of women, or like long hair. There we go. There's one. Or a head covering on women. And I think there's a lot of things, I just joke about that, but there's a lot of things that I think, whether we say it outright, we imply that we're okay with it, because there are congregations where women wear head coverings, and we don't do that here.
Right.
And I think we've maybe changed with the times from that perspective, right? And I think it was something that seems to have been, more associated then, but it's not as relevant. It doesn't seem relevant to us today. If it seemed relevant to us, I think we would be talking about it, and we'd be expecting, our women to wear head coverings. But I don't think it's relevant to us.
Right.
I
So
can see that.
so there's some lesser matters of just convenience, or cultural matters, like you were talking about, expedience that change.
Increasingly non-religious population. Thousands of churches are closing each year. I was going to say that people are just not attending, maybe once a year. It's just continuing. So that's part of this change.
Right.
Especially the younger generation.
It's not meeting their needs.
Right. We saw.
That's the reason why we're embarrassed. But that's the reason why that little girl, I appreciate it so much. And all of us, they're always here.
Yeah.
I think that says a whole lot, because the younger generation as a whole, that's just not the case.
Yeah. That's right. And we saw that over Christmas too. Christmas on Sunday, and a lot of churches just weren't meeting, and a lot of younger people too. Yeah, absolutely. Ken? Yeah, absolutely. So again, there's good progression. That's right. Well, whenever we're thinking about this term, progressive Christianity, as it relates to today, I'll tell you what it means to me. Progressive Christianity is a opposed branch of Christianity, but they basically hate everything about Christianity. That's how I would sum it up. It's certainly not new, but it's certainly it's more popular in recent years than in the past. But it's a category of people who claim to be Christians yet stand for things that are extremely unbiblical. And so what they're trying to do is, in progressive Christianity, is trying to take the emphasis off of Scripture, take the emphasis off of what the Bible actually says, really downplay the importance of the Bible at all. And the reason is, again, because the Bible teaches things that they don't agree with. So they'll cling to the person of Jesus, or rather they'll cling to a caricature of Jesus that they have created. Anything that Moses or Paul or John wrote, irrelevant, and we'll see that in the coming weeks as well, because I think I'm going to take a few more weeks on this. Sure.
But she mentioned to us last Tuesday as well as Joan. You know, our kids listen to music and they have their role models, so forth like that. But one who was very, very popular in Alabama has now said, what was the term she used? That
She considers herself a Christian, but she doesn't follow the culture.
and see our kids are
Yeah, so that's exactly what we're talking about. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir.
So today, anybody who watches the Super Bowl will see a series of commercials that they will be pushing that I think illustrates what we're talking about today. The campaign is called Jesus Gets Us.
Yeah.
You've seen some of the commercials. They take the us in Jesus and they slide it down and make Jesus gets us, he gets us. And what they're showing is a lot of people doing questionable things that say Jesus is okay with this, is basically what it's saying.
Right.
That a lot of people that we might consider lost today and in need of Jesus, he already gets them. He's already taking care of them. He's already.
Right.
And it's a permissive type of a thing in which you don't have to be this holy person like the Christians say. Jesus gets you no matter where you're at.
So again, clinging to this caricature, this idea of Jesus that I create in my mind, that I cling to. Mark.
I would apply that to one of them is close to where I grew up. It's a congregation of about maybe 100, 150 people. I remember when they first started out, it was maybe 30 or less. And they had well organized. I always told them about studies with their neighbors and stuff. They had a series of home set up on the property for widows. They're always geared to the community, just continue to grow and grow. I call them progressive, but it's good. They're what they're doing can be found in the New Testament church. And it's really a star congregation. He said.
Right.
That whole area.
Yep.
The other thing with another congregation is asking service people. And they were a very rapid growing congregation there. We do leadership of about 1,800, 2,000 people. And then started drifting. Had a little confusion there with their women's role in corporate service. And then they instituted instrumental music, different worship services, and eventually merged with the Baptist church next door. They were very progressive. They were reaching out for anything to do. And the name of all the things they were doing was to draw people to Christ. But it wasn't Bible.
Right. Went over some boundaries. Yeah. Sure. Right. There's always exceptions. Of course, we just kind of use terms to overgeneralize sometimes. But, you know, some forward-thinking congregations are doing some very good things, like you're saying. Now, about 2 years ago, a group of what I'll call progressive Christians that have some sort of established online presence. They released like a certain commandments or tenets of progressive Christianity. It's kind of like the Ten Commandments, except there's just 23 instead of 10. And unlike the Ten Commandments, it's total garbage and ungodly and unbiblical in every way. I'd like us to consider a few of these points because these are things that people are really starting to believe these days. We're going to look at some of these tenets of progressive Christianity, and what I'd like for us to do is to respond to them. What I wanted for this class was for it to be even more discussion-based than usual. It doesn't seem like I'm going to have much of a problem with that. And we're really just going to try to think about, again, why we believe what we believe, why we think these things are unscriptural. I suppose if you think they're not, we could talk about that too, but I doubt that will be the case. So let's apply some critical thinking this morning. Now, like I said, there are 23 total, and we're obviously not going to get to all of those today. Some of them are pretty silly, I guess is the best, nicest term I could use. So we won't ever get to those, but we'll get through a few of these, and maybe next week or maybe just a Sunday down the line we'll discuss more. The ones we're going to look at today are all about the same general thing, and I'll introduce exactly what that is in a few moments. All right, now in my estimation, there are three things that progressive Christians will work the hardest to do away with, and that is the reality of the wrath of God, the reality of hell or an eternal punishment, and the inerrancy and the authority of the Bible. Those are the three things that they'll work the hardest to try to explain away and do away with. And we'll see all these things come out in some of the points. But the points that we're going to look at today, I'll deal with the same thing, and that being the wrath of God, which is a concept that we've seen in Romans, particularly back in chapter 1. And we see it as a biblical fact, but they see it rather as something to tear down. Here's one of the points. Wrath of God and hell aren't literal. They are only metaphors for swimming against the flow of God's love. Now, like I said, I want us to be thinking about these points and what your response might be to them. But before we do that, I think we really just have to first define what this term, swimming against the flow of God's love, actually means. And to be brief, it basically means that we're all in this metaphorical pool or river of God's love. And you can either do what he likes and you can be swimming right along with the current, or you can do what he doesn't like and you'll be swimming against the flow of God's love. So either way, you're enjoying God's love. You're in his grace. So there's really nothing negative about sin. It just has, this kind of like slightly negative connotation of, you probably shouldn't do those things. But eventually, you'll enjoy all the things that those who swim with the current do. And by the way, all these points basically imply universalism. Universalism being the idea that everybody's intrinsically safe. Nobody's lost, again, no hell. But anyway, what do you think about the idea that the wrath of God and hell are not real things, but metaphors?
Well, I was going to ask a question.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Do they have any substantial literature to back up what they say, or just because they say it, that's what it is? I mean, everything that comes from the church comes from the authority of God.
Right.
We don't and Jim thinks, and Charles thinks, none of that's in there. It's what God said. So where are they backing up these things? Is it listed in their literature anywhere?
No. No, there's no Bible references or really any other kind of citations. It's really just broad strokes of looking at the Bible. God is love, God is grace, and so everyone is enjoying his love and his grace.
That's what I always heard. God is love, so he couldn't possibly do those things.
Right.
So that's the basis of that statement. So then all of the descriptive terms for and the place or the situation that the lost find themselves, that's just all metaphorical. It doesn't mean what it says.
Right.
And where do they get any proof of it? I mean, how do they prove it? God's love.
Sure. Right.
They believe, they necessarily believe, yeah.
Some of them just outright deny the whole thing. But yeah, something it's just for the worst of the worst, who we think. Any other ideas? Any other responses? Right. Hmm. Yeah, kind of like a reformed idea of purgatory, the Catholic purgatory.
Well, isn't that the idea behind the 1,000-year reign of Christ? So,
Yeah.
I mean, why hang out for 1,000 years if not to give the bad people another shot? I mean, I don't see any logic to that either.
Years ago, one of my cousins, I think, in college, which the professor showed him the Bible study this.
He should take a literature class. So the first thing that struck me about this, again, swimming against the flow of God's love, that's a metaphor, right? And so what they're saying is the wrath of God and hell aren't literal. They're only metaphors for a metaphor. So they're taking things that are not actually metaphors at all and turning them into metaphors that actually represent a different metaphor. That makes no sense. Metaphor for metaphor that's an oxymoron. That'd be self-defeating. So the first thing that tells me is that whoever put all these points together didn't actually put all that much thought into them. So it's totally irrational. It's totally mind-boggling. But I think that's beside the point. I think the point is just to feel good. Doesn't that statement feel good? You're just not swimming. You're just swimming against the flow of God's love. That's just a thing that you say to make yourself feel better. Scratching itching ears, as Paul would put it in 2 Timothy 4. If I believe this, then suddenly I don't have much of a problem with non-Christians not being non-Christians. I don't have to evangelize because I can just say to them, hey man, it's all good. You're just swimming against the flow of God's love. But again, they want to undo this notion of the wrath of God. It seems that for some, they believe that if God is angry, then he's no longer loving. If he has any anger at all, he cannot be characterized as being love. But I don't know why that has to be the case. There are some things that we really need to get angry at. We should get angry over child molestation. We should get angry over rapes that occur or human trafficking or things like that. The sin of mankind should invoke wrath. Again, they say that if God has wrath, then there's something wrong with him. But really, if God wasn't wrathful over sin, then there would be something very wrong with him. You couple this with the fact that there are over 20 different words in Scripture used to signify God's wrath towards sin, and they're not metaphors, they're not allegories. They're even like these pinnacle moments of God's wrath, the flood, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the destruction of Nineveh, destruction of Jerusalem, the temple at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. Those are again like pinnacle moments of God's wrath where it just got so much where he let it all out. And you can't say that Sodom and Gomorrah merely swam against the flow of God's love. At least I would doubt anyone in those cities would describe it that way. They were hit by literal fire and brimstone from God. The reality is that mankind's sin is real. And it's at the core of the gospel message. If there's no sin, if there's no wrath, then again, like we talked about in Romans, the good news isn't actually good news at all. In fact, if there's no sin and if there's no wrath of God, then the cross makes absolutely no sense either. The cross makes no sense without our sin invoking the righteous wrath of God, because why would Jesus die at all? Scott.
So the whole idea behind the gospel and us accepting it is the idea that we understand at some point in our lives that we are flawed, that we're sinful creatures, and that we can't get there on our own. We can't perfect ourselves. We can't be better. We can't improve. We can't be what we need to be according to the scriptures. So now these people who are flawed beings have taken it upon themselves to write a righteous document about how God is. So they sum up God from a sinner's point of view, and they don't see they're shortchanging it at all. That's part of the problem. Is I think Do you understand that you're a mortal creature and only been here for a few decades, and you deign to think that you have the answers? We should start with the premise that we don't. That's how you accept Christ and take on that life of service.
Right.
Because you understand that as a sinner, we can't do these things. But they're taking the place, they don't even start from a neutral point. They don't say, we're bad and we're trying to be better. They say, this is how God is.
That's right.
And they lay it out. That's arrogance.
Yeah.
That's ignorance.
Yeah.
That's arrogance and ignorance run amok. Which is why man will never be able to define God. We can't sum him up. We can only sum him up from our own point of view. And yours will be different than mine. And mine will be different than yours. Everybody's viewpoint will be different.
Right. If only we had something to actually tell us how he actually is.
They have authority that we can put our, plant our hat on.
That's absolutely right. And those are things that are going to bring it on in this next quote. Before we move on to that, any other questions or comments or responses? Exactly.
So you maybe go to that cross. Not really a true fact.
That's right.
Do they even believe that the cross took place?
I think so. But again, I don't know what the purpose is. Well, actually, I actually, there is one, the third quote that I have actually does deal with that. So if we do get there, we'll get there. Ken. Right. That's right. Yeah. Conventions and stuff. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Here's another point, and this goes back to what Ken was saying earlier. The next one is this: God's justice isn't punitive; it's restorative. Now, what do you think that is meant by that? Okay, it's for a different purpose than what we've always been told it is. Okay. Right. Right. Yeah. Whatever that means. Yeah. Mark. Yes. Right.
We will suffer some things in terms of discipline.
Right.
But I guess I think what they're trying to say is just laws. I don't know what they're trying to say.
well,
I'm trying to reconcile that to the point that God disciplines those he loves, okay. But he does, there is justice.
yes. So we would usually use the word judgment or discipline. They were very careful with their wording to where they were almost forcing people to agree with them. Well, yeah, that's what I'd say. Christy? Yeah.
There is a right, there's wrong, but they're canceling their own works.
Right.
Can't that, both of those be true?
Yeah, that's
What we think of. It's a punishment. It's a disciplinary thing, but it's always just as parents do it for a restorative prospect. That's what the virtues of it are for. God doesn't punish you and then let it go. There's a purpose for that. There's a deterrent for that. God usually warns before he acts. And so
Yeah.
the failure to act is part of the punishment. But the restorative part of it is the whole Bible. That's He's restoring all of us.
Right, yeah.
Right, I think the problem with the statement comes from a basic misunderstanding of God's, because God's justice comes about at the end of the world when God's justice comes about. It's not here. We suffer the consequences of our actions here. That's not necessarily God's justice, although we did see God's justice play out in the Old Testament. He did things, caused things to happen, and he mentioned Sodom and Gomorrah and things like that to people. But his justice is then, it's not, okay, I did something, I have a consequence of that. Those consequences are God paid in place by his.
Yeah.
So, yeah, God's, that's just, it's a misunderstanding of
Right. I think that's an important distinction to make, because I do think there are ways that God presently does enact justice. I think he does right some wrongs in this life. But like you're saying at the end, well, there's not going to be any more restorativeness at the end. That's the final. Yeah. Ken? Yeah. Right. Right. I've got a few of his books in my office too. Yeah. Sure. Now, it seems that they're saying that God doesn't punish people. That's the first thing. God doesn't, justice, he doesn't punish anybody. So he doesn't punish people when they sin, but rather he just tries to restore them. It just gently tries to reinforce that maybe they probably shouldn't be doing the bad things that they are doing. But that he's going to restore them and accept them again, eventually anyway, again, universalism. So punitive is, I'm punishing you because you deserve it. Restorative is, I'm using this small suffering to get you back. Now, it would be easy just to point to all the clear examples of God's punitive justice in the Bible, but again, we're trying to think through these things. And my answer would be, like Scott said, it's not an either-or thing, but it's both. Speaking of the present justice that goes on, God's justice is both punitive and restorative, at least for now. But my main objection to this is that when you try to make it an either-or kind of thing, that it then becomes very narcissistic. Whenever I say that God's justice is restorative, what I mean is that he's going to restore me. Not just that he's going to restore order, or he's going to restore what's right, or he's going to balance the scales. I mean that he's going to restore or bring me back. And so when it's all about me and restoring me, then I have a very narcissistic worldview. I want you to imagine this world. Imagine a world where all the cops, all the police officers don't do their jobs. Now, at times you could maybe make the argument that that is the world that we live in, but imagine that they literally never bust criminals. Whenever someone is caught in a crime, they just urge them to gently, stop being a criminal. They ask the criminals to stop swimming against the flow of their love, right? But then one day the cops just decide, we're going to put everyone in prison. Everyone that deserves to be in prison, we're putting them in. They're enacting punitive justice. If that happened, society would rejoice. The common person no longer has to fear living in this lawless land. But who wouldn't be rejoicing? The criminals. Criminals would not be happy. Keep that in mind. Let's keep thinking about criminals. Think about the people who murder people and commit domestic violence and all these terrible things. Society looks at those and they think that they are the scum of the earth. But how do the criminals think of themselves? Are they all just in their jail cells thinking, I'm just such a terrible and such a guilty person? What do they genuinely think about their sentence? I got a bum rap. The judges are crooked. The cops are crooked. Society is set against me. And that's who we become. That's who we become if we say that God's justice is only restorative and not punitive. We become the criminals who are so obsessed with ourselves that we can't even comprehend the idea that we might actually be the bad guy. And I'll just give one example of punitive justice in the Bible. There's so many more. Remember Romans chapter 1? He started off by talking about, or saying that talking to the Gentiles by saying that the wrath of God is revealed against them and all their wrongdoings, and he lists off all the sins of the Gentiles. And then notice how he wrapped up to what is us, chapter 1, Romans 1:32. Who, knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also prove of those who practice them. And it really just can't get much clearer than that. Any questions, any other comments on that? I have one more, and I don't know that we would have time to get through all of it. So are you sure you don't have anything else to add?
It's the
Good.
says, not everyone that comes to me on the last day will be welcomed in heaven. He gives a description there of people who seem to be a lot like these people and saying, hey, we did all these great things for you, God. We did this, we did that. And he tells them, depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. You didn't follow my laws, you followed your own. And now you're arrogantly telling me how well you did with your own ways.
Yeah.
And he tells them to get away from him. They never knew me. So I would bring that to these people's attention and say, you should consider this, because this is God speaking to you.
Right.
You're either calling God a liar or Jesus a liar,
Yeah.
because Jesus is the one quoted here. Or you're ignoring what God has earnestly tried to go out of the way and say. He said that because of their attitudes, the way that they were carrying on. Not everybody's going to get into heaven. And he brings up that point that you better check yourself. You think you're righteous. So,
Yeah. Scott, I hear what you're saying, but that passage, that was mistranslated and that was corrupted, and so I don't have to listen to that anymore. That's kind of how it goes.
And I would say, how do you come about to the idea that that was corrupt? Can you show me some kind of proof that that's a corrupted
Right.
verse? But that all the other verses that you're using are okay.
Are fine, yeah. It also, we can also connect this to what we've been seeing in Romans with the Jews lately too. They rejected God's righteousness and established their own. Now theirs was very different. Theirs was a system of law keeping and trying to be justified by that. But this is the same kind of thing in that we're seeing what God has said, seeing what he's prophesied, not caring about that and just doing what I want to do anyway. But you can do that. You can do what you want to do, but just don't try to justify it by God's means. Man.
Scripture is gone, except that which emphasizes God's love.
Basically.
Absolutely, no text, that's meaningless to them, right there.
I just would ask, how do you pick one verse and say that's good, that's truthful, but this verse isn't?
It's a good question.
You just arbitrarily go through the Bible and this doesn't make sense.
Because I like this one and I don't like that other one.
This one, but you
Ken?
Us who are in the faith, Christians, is to go and to deceive ourselves. Exactly what's God saying. On that day, he will say, I will not cast my iniquity, I will not surely those people that deceive themselves into believing that they were right with what they were believing.
Yeah, the Hebrew writer tells us to not let ourselves be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. We can trick our own selves.
It's progressive theology. Taking what was written, what was being taught, what was being evangelized, and saying, oh, there's more to it that you don't know.
Right.
I do think it's not as simple as to say, well, they've thrown out all verses they don't agree with. I can see, I put myself in the devil's advocate here, so to speak. Who know the righteous judgment of God, those who practice such things are deserving of death.
But not actually granted
Not
death.
actually going to get it, because look at other passages he does not desire that any perish, but all should be saved. Well, that's true. So these are true things. They're just taking it a step beyond. If they say, well, yeah, we may be deserving, but God's going to save everyone. So they could not throw out that. They could just say, well, it says you're deserving, but it's not actually saying you will die. Other passages that they might point to and say you're not going to. But there, of course, we have passages that do say you are going to be. Just talk about those that be, says
Right.
try to enter in, won't be able to enter the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah. So there's different levels to this too. Some would probably say that. Others, like the ones that of the list that I had, they're trying to really do away with the whole notion of sin really being bad at all or carrying any weight at all. And so if you're deserving of death, obviously that it does. But
But the reason I struggle so much with that first, where that one is just the fact that it's true that God is disciplining us, desires us to repent and return, and
Right.
still says this is a timely thing, is what it boils down to. Because at some point, you have not repented, and you're not going
right. I'll get you and I'll cut you off.
I know that we constantly harp on this and said it in lessons and stuff, but I do think it's really as simple as this. When we look at the pattern of the Old Testament, which we're supposed to use historical knowledge and reflect this on our own behavior, we see that the Jews had a pattern constant throughout all the period in which sustained error and rebellion against God was that's what caused them to act. First, the prophets came out, told them what they were doing wrong, told them why God was wrathful with them, and what he was going to do if they didn't change their way. This pattern goes over and over and over and over. And when they didn't do it, then the justice came, the wrath of God came. But what I'm looking at is that the errors of the Jewish nation came about when they failed to do what God said. What did he say? Teach your children. I'm the God of your father and your father's father. I've been with you all the way. I'm eternal. You're not. Teach your next generation of youth who I am. So when I come to them, they'll know me. And the entire generations, over and over and over, failed to be taught. What did they do? They worshiped the Baals. They worshiped the high places. They gave sacrifices to other gods because they didn't know God. And then he brought his prophets in and told them, this is not acceptable. You've forgotten me. And I knew your fathers. That's what's happened today. You can sum it all up in saying that those who knew the truth did not press that to their children. Their children grew up, knew a little of God, but not very much. And that's what they taught to their children. And eventually, 3 or 4 or 5 generations down the line, you ask a child about Psalms 115, and they go, what's that? They don't even know what Psalms are, much less the 115th verse. Whereas the children before knew God from the time they were babies. They knew him. They prayed to him at the dinner table before they went to bed, before they went to school. In school, they prayed. Now, he's non-existent. So you get this. People who've forgotten what God is and now make up what he is.
Yep.
And what he is.
Same thing with the period of the judges. Why they got into that whole cycle is because fathers didn't indoctrinate their children. And we think that word indoctrinate is a dirty word, but it's just really just teaching. Yeah. All right. I think we'll probably pick up and do this again next Sunday.